It's Chris here, welcome to the stream. We're going to be starting shortly. Here's a quick sound test. And this is the second sound test. We're going to be starting the stream very shortly. Going to be starting shortly. Just a quick test of the different views here. Is it all looking okay? Seems okay. Hi everybody, welcome to this live stream and welcome back to the Spreadsheet Skunkworks. It is of course the Excel VBA Chess Challenge. And what is it all about, the Excel VBA Chess Challenge? Well, it's a fun and creative way to learn Excel VBA, and it's what I call my infinity project. It's called an infinity project because it's never really going to have an end. You know, even people who build real chess computers, they're still trying to improve them now. And to be honest, I don't think we're going to quite get as good as those chess computers, but it just shows that this is an open-ended, ongoing project and maximizes learning opportunity for us. So, got some people in the chat. Hello, Michelle, and thank you so much for being here. So let me know in the chat where you are, what the weather is like. You know, us British people, we're obsessed with the weather, always talking about the weather. So I'm here. I live in a place called the Vale of Beaver in the UK, but that's Beaver spelled Belvoir. And yeah, it's a cloudy day. We've had some very hot weather recently, but it's just been overcast and warm today, so not too bad at all. And I'm actually in a new office facility, so I've got a dedicated facility for filming these days, and hopefully it means I'm going to be able to do more videos, push this community forward. So thank you for the support. Thank you for participating. Right. So let's get into just checking if the stream is still online. Perhaps you can let me know in the chat if the stream is still online. I'm getting conflicting information from my systems here. Some of them saying that it is online, some of them saying that it isn't online. But yeah, seems to be online at the moment. So hello, Tony in the chat. Welcome, Tony. Yeah, I think we exchanged a few emails. Tony tuning in from Cardiff. Cardiff is sunny at the moment. Fantastic stuff. So let's get into our file. And remember, you can download this file on the website. Just go to the website, go to the articles. There's an article called Chess Challenge, Spreadsheet Skunkworks. You can download it and work along with me. Thank you, Tony. Tony says the stream is fine. That's very helpful. Thank you. So now I had something of a nasty surprise, I think we could say. You know, I was just getting the stream started, looking at the file, thinking about what we were going to do. And then this happened. Let me show you what happened. I clicked on the night down here, and then this happened. Now, any chess player can tell you that, well, they are not the knight moves. Remember, we're in a situation now where we can click on any piece, and ignoring the pieces that are kind of blocking the squares, we can see all of the possible moves. And it seems to be working for all the different pieces. Even the black knight seems to be working fine, but wasn't working here for the white knights. So I was thinking we're going to have a nice easy stream. You know, we've been making some nice progress in the past couple of weeks, just putting the moves in for the different pieces. I was thinking a nice routine stream, and then just fired up the file, and I see we've actually got an error in it. But this happens. This happens, guys, in Excel VBA development, in computer programming, in any kind of project. You know, you progress things, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, we might say. In this case, we've put something in, and somehow it's interacted with a mechanism that's already there to make it work differently and to create this kind of inaccuracy. So we've got to get our kind of debugging boots on quickly and try to understand what is going on. Now, how do we do debugging? Well, we've done a lot of debugging already in the series. I'd call it a kind of Excel meta skill, a meta skill. So it's one of those skills between the cracks, I'd say. You know, when people think about Excel, they say, yeah, I can do VLOOKUP, or I can do some VBA programming. I'm actually more interested in meta skills. So when things go wrong, how do you react? Can you do debugging? Have you got a kind of process you can work through? And you've seen some things in the series already. What kind of things do we do? Well, we can put stopping points into the code, a break point like this, just by clicking the margin. And that means the code will run to a certain place, and then we can stop it and see what's going on. Then we've got facilities like the step into facility here. That means we can step through the code and look at the Excel screen at the same time and understand what's going on. And we've seen me use message boxes to externalize pieces of information. For example, the value of a variable or something, we've used message boxes to do that too. So there's various things that we can call on here. But my kind of instinct is telling me that the thing that we put in most recently is probably causing the problem, because we've been testing frequently. It's been a big theme of these series. I'm always saying, you know, test as you go along. Don't save it for the end. That's what we've been doing. So I'm pretty confident it's not something we put in earlier. It's something we've put in quite recently. So how might we test this? Well, we could test this by taking the code that we've just put in the last session, switching it off, if you like, taking that code out, and then do we still have the same problem? That's going to allow us to isolate the problem, identify the problem, then we can think about fixing it. So that's a sensible first step in debugging. Can you identify, isolate the problem? Then we can think about how to fix it. Now, these two constructs here, these two little paragraphs, they look like paragraphs of code, don't they? But they're actually single lines of code, and they're being joined together using these underscores. And they're fairly complicated lines of code. And you know, through the series, I've kind of expressed my reservations about using these very long lines of code, because, you know, my logical mind is simply not really strong enough to quickly process all of these and or pieces of logic. But I have put them in, and I've got a bit better at understanding these. But yeah, I have a feeling that these are problematic. So let's just switch one off. Let's remind ourselves what's going on. So we click on the knight here. We can see this square G2 on the chessboard, I9 on Excel, cell I9. This shouldn't be highlighted. This is not a possible knight move. So I'm going to switch off all the coding we did last time and then see, do we still have the same problem? Now, when I said switch off the code, you might have thought, well, you're just going to delete it, right? Yep, that's one thing we could do. But if you delete the code, then you might subsequently want to bring it back, and it's not easy to do. You know, you could copy paste it somewhere else, but the easiest way to do it is simply to retain it in the VBA editor and just comment it out. What I did then is called commenting out. You can see the code is now green. That means that the VBA editor is going to ignore the code during execution, but we can retain it in the VBA editor in case we want to use it. So we've switched off the code we added last time, and now we can see, do we still have the problem? So I'm going to go back to the night, clicking on the night, and we can see we now actually don't have the problem. Clicking on the other nights, just to double check. Okay, so we've isolated the problem, or at least we're moving towards isolating the problem, because we're moving towards isolating the problem, but it could be one of two kind of sources, we could say. It could be this code here, or it could be this code here. So can we go into a high level of detail, zoom in either further, be really precise about what the problem is? Thank you guys for tuning in. We've got Michelle in the chat, Tony in the chat, Paul in the chat. Paul, how are you? Just finished work. How was your day, Paul? What do you do? And did you use Excel today? That's my question. What did you do in Excel? And Mo has tuned in as well. Welcome, Mo. And Mo says, my visual doesn't work when I click, it closes automatically. Not absolutely sure what you mean by that, Mo. If you let me know in the chat, I might be able to help. So let's switch one of these lines of code back on, and then do we still have the problem? We're going to switch this line of code back on. And I've got a feeling that this line of code is the problematic line of code. So I just switched it back on there by deleting, you can see it in your screenshot, but you do have to look carefully, deleting the inverted commas. We put the inverted commas in, that turns the line of code green, turns it into a comment. So back to the board now, and I can see my problem is back now. Okay, so this gives us a very strong hint. This piece of code is probably problematic, but just to confirm, I'm going to switch it off again and then try it just with the second line of code. Okay, and then this should be okay if we're correct. Yep, all of the night moves look okay here. But of course, because we've switched off this line of code, which allows the pawn to move one square, then the pawn functionality, is not quite working at the moment. So, but we're expecting that because we switched off some of that functionality. Okay, so this is the working fine at the moment. So this is the offending line of code here. So what are we going to do? We need this functionality. We need this line of code, but it's not quite working for us. Now, I think it's to do, as I said, I think it's to do with the logic here and how these ands and ors are fitting together, and I could sit here and try to work out all of those logical connotations. But as I said, I'm not particularly strong at doing that. And to be honest, I'd like an easier way to do it. I'm prepared at this point to sacrifice some of the efficiency, because we can see when we're clicking on the pieces, we're actually using the program, the efficiency is reasonable enough. So I'm prepared to sacrifice a small amount of that efficiency, a tiny proportion really of that efficiency, in order to simplify things. And looking through this code, I know that we're looking at both the black and white pieces here. So we've got a B here for black, a W for white. So rather than having all of this in a single line of code, a long piece of syntax, I'm going to fragment it into two pieces of syntax. That means the VBA editor has more to read, but it's easier for us to understand. So if you're looking for kind of a principle to take forward in your coding, sometimes sacrificing some efficiency in order to get simplification, clarification, that can be a good idea. Right, so I'm going to replace this with an and then we need all of this up here. We're definitely going to get some errors here. The VBA editor is going to tell us it needs some extra information. As always, VBA editor is trying to help. Okay, so what if we do this? Right, so I'm just checking through the code now. So we've got all of these ands. Okay, I think I can take this comma out now, this bracket out now, I think. Yeah. So now we've got just a simple, well, a simpler line of code. We're just using ands there to link together these pieces of syntax. For me, once we integrate or, you know, the stress levels, you know, kind of go up. And yeah, so I'm more comfortable just using ands for this. Cool. Then we need to do a similar thing here. For the black pieces. Okay, then we can remove these brackets again. And this is happening. Okay. So I'm not sure if this is going to work. We can update our annotations here. This is for a white piece. And then this is for a black piece here. Not sure if this is going to work. And to be honest, if it doesn't work, then I think I'm going to look at it in my own time rather than do it live on the internet and see if I can debug it and then push this task forward and do something else. Let me know in the chat, by the way, are you following along? Have you downloaded the file? Are you following along with me? So checking through this code, does it look reasonable? Looks reasonable enough to me. Control S, save the file. Then hitting the night. Yep, that's now accurate. Hitting the night again, that is now accurate. The night again is now accurate. Okay, so I think we've managed to debug. We've managed to successfully debug that problem. I'm happy with where we've got to. Okay. So my question is for people in the chat. So we've got a few people watching now. Thank you. The question for people in the my question for people in the chat. My question for you is: when were you last dealing with this in Excel? When did you last have a problem in Excel? Something wasn't working. Something used to work and stopped working. When did it happen? How did you deal with it? Could be a stressful situation. What strategies do you have for dealing with that? Let me know and let's share some information there. Okay, so another kind of thing or another feature that I was thinking about is this setup board button. So what we've just seen is by integrating some new code, it can affect the old code. It can affect the old code, and sometimes the old code doesn't work well. So it's a good idea in your testing to test the existing functions when you build in something new. This setup board function, it's something that I haven't touched for a few sessions. Yeah. So now's a good time. You know, does it still work? If it doesn't work, then we need to update the code to make sure it does. So I'm just going to Control S, save the file. I'm just going to hit setup board now. Then what do we get? A nice confirmation box, reset. I wonder when I programmed this in, it must have been a year or 18 months ago. Then hit yes. And what's happening? Okay, yeah, we do have a reset now. Just going to look at the engine sheet. Does everything look reasonable? Yes. Everything is there. Have I still got my moves table name? Yep, that's there as well. So I'm just checking through the file. Is everything present and correct after having run that routine? And then do the macros still work? So clicking the night, the pawn, yep, seems to be working well. Can I move the pawn one square further forward? Let's see what happens here. Yeah, we've got a possible pawn move there. We've got a bishop up here. Let's put the bishop in the middle of the board and just see what's going on. And there's the bishop. Okay, so we're doing testing, but we've got to a point, and this always happens on Excel projects. You get to a point where it's actually quite fun doing the testing because you've put a lot of work into it and you've created something cool, something that saves lots of time. In this case, something that provides a nice visual effect. So it can be fun doing testing. Let's put the knight in the middle of the board now. Click on it. And we've got all the possible moves there. Looks good. Let's put the king out over here. Okay, and then hitting the king there. I think the king is just off the board. That's why we didn't get any options there. Hitting the king and we got the options there. Good. So I'm pretty happy with that. Just again, a little test. And then I'm going to hit set at the board to reset the pieces. Okay, what's going on in the chat? Are you working along with me? Let me know. Who's in the chat? We have Michelle, Tony, Paul, Mo, and Carlos is here. Carlos, welcome. So Carlos, the question of the day, or as always, you know, British people like me obsessed with the weather. So where are you tuning in from, Carlos? And what is the weather like over there? So we've got to think about what are we going to do next. And as I said, well, let me tell you a story about a real chess player. You know, in real life, I'm quite interested in chess. You know, I don't always, share this at parties and stuff, but I used to play chess when I was young, when I was at primary school, which is up to age 11 here in the UK. And the world champion, Magnus Carlsen, I follow chess when the world championship happens. And there was a world championship last year in November, I think. And there was lots of coverage of the championship and interviews with Magnus Carlsen there. Tony says, strangely, my own copy of number 14 did work okay. Yeah, it's a funny one, Tony. Like, I thought it was working okay as well. So I'm not absolutely sure what's happening. Seems to be working okay now. But back to the chess story. And Magnus Carlsen, clearly a very interesting guy, and there's a movie about him as well that I found kind of interesting, kind of documentary movie. But he talks about obviously chess a lot, and he says a really complex chess problem, he can kind of view it, he kind of looks at it, and then he doesn't think about it. He goes away, does other things, and he says it subconsciously ticks over in the back of his mind. So he's not actively thinking about it, not doing exercises or anything. And then the solution can just kind of come. And I thought that was really interesting, that you can, not actively thinking about something and the solution can just kind of come to you. But I suppose if you're used to looking at lots of the same kind of problem, you've got to it's kind of deep in your subconscious, I suppose. Anyway, I found that really interesting, but I suggest you apply that to your programming. And I'm definitely not saying that I'm anything like somebody like Magnus Carlsen. I think what we can see from this series is I'm a very manual programmer. It's really quite labored, the process I go through, compared to, someone with kind of a brilliant programming mind or a brilliant mind like Magnus Carlsen. But I have tried to integrate this into my practice. So at any given time, I'm currently working on about 8 to 10 Excel projects for customers. And that means you've got to be pretty organized with your work. I've got deadlines coming, I've got a deadline this week, got one next week, got one the week after. But one thing I've been doing is looking at a file ahead of time. So I've got time scheduled in, or it's not scheduled in, but I know I'm going to be working on a particular file in about a week's time. So what I do is I get the file open, look at the problem, and just kind of click around, just play with it a bit and just try to think about it. But I don't look for the solution. But I'm trying to do this Magnus Carlsen thing where you get yourself acquainted with the problem. Yep, that's the problem. Put it in the back of your head. And then it just kind of ticks away in the background. And I've actually found it's really quite effective for me. I've come up with some really good solutions, not actively thinking about a problem, just letting it tick away in the back of my mind. And this has happened, through experience. So many times I've worked really, really hard on a programming problem, really hard, couple of hours, hardcore programming, feeling really tired afterwards. And then the next day I come back to it and think, actually, that's not the best approach. So I'm trying to find, the best way of working. What's the most efficient way to work? And with programming, if you're under pressure, you're stressed, you're just trying to do it as fast as possible, you rarely produce quality code. But often the solution that you're working on is not going to be optimal just because you're not in the right kind of mindset. So anyway, that's some ideas from my practice that have really been quite effective for me. Excellent. So what do you think in the chat? So Paul says, Yorkshire, rain and sun in the last 10 minutes. Yeah, I think we're going to have some rain here, Paul, down near Nottingham I am. Kevin, welcome. Welcome to the stream. So I've had some emails with Kevin. I think Kevin is over in New York or over in the States. So thank you for tuning in. It must be around lunchtime there. So maybe you've got a bit of lunch and catching up with the Tiger stream. Fantastic stuff. Kevin says, working along with you. Excellent. Good man. but I've built my own chessboard file since the start of the series. Only slight differences. I love it. I love it. A few people have got in touch with me and said, I've used your file, but done it slightly differently. Excellent. I've had lots of comments in the YouTube videos where people have done things slightly better. Excellent. Done things more efficiently. You know, I've learned a few things myself. So definitely, I'm not saying this is the best way to build a chess computer in Excel. I'm not even saying it's possible to build a chess computer in Excel. It's all about going through the process and being reflective and then improving your own practice. So if you're working along, you've got a file as well. Fantastic stuff. Maybe one day, Kevin says, yeah, right around lunchtime in NYC. Fantastic. Yes, then maybe one day we could have an Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions, Spreadsheet Skunkworks chess tournament where we can play all of the spreadsheet chess computers against each other. See who's actually built the best one. That would be fantastic. Carlos also in the chat is over in Munich. Cloudy as usual over here. Carlos, you sound like you're British, complaining about the weather there, but very good. Thank you for tuning in. So we've got to think about what we're doing next, and I've been thinking about that. Well, it's been ticking over in the back of my mind. Now, we're going to have to establish at some point, well, there's two kind of long-term problems here. The first problem is the problem of blocking pieces. So I've put the rook, just clicked on the rook here. That's highlighting possible moves, but of course, all of these moves are impossible because there's pieces blocking. There's this pawn on h2 and there's this knight on g1, which blocks all of the possible pieces. So how are we going to program in that idea of a blocking piece? And that's the thing that's ticking over in the back of my mind at the moment. I do find it pops up in my head and I have kind of a spurt of mental activity thinking about how we might do this. So I do have some ideas. I don't want to go into those now. We'll get to those in future videos. Another idea or another thing we've got to look at, and it's particularly relevant for the pawn, is capturing other pieces. So let's just set up some pawns here. So say the pawn's here. So I've got our h pawn here, and then we've got the black g pawn. Bring it down here. So if the black pawn is here, then the white pawn only has one possible move. The white pawn can only go forward to this square. But if the black pawn is on g5 on the chessboard, i6 on the Excel spreadsheet there, then this pawn has an additional move because pawns can capture diagonally, of course. Pawns capture diagonally in chess. One of those rules that I didn't even think about at the start. But yeah, that's clearly something we have to integrate. As with any project, complexity is emergent. We look at it at the start and think, yeah, I can probably do that. As we go through it, the complexity emerges. And yeah, I did not think it would be this difficult to try to create the chess computer in Excel. I think actually in the first stream, the first video in the series, so there's 14 videos, this is the 15th in the series. The first video in the series, which was 2017, I think, in May 2017, I said, maybe by September, we can play somebody on chess.com using this chess computer. So that's an example of how easy it is to underestimate programming tasks. 2 years later, we're still working on this. But, it's all good. It's, as I said, it's an infinity project. It's all about creating learning opportunity. So what I'm getting to is that we have to be able to understand where all of the pieces are on the board, because that affects possible moves. Paul says, which year though? Do you mean which year I started this, Paul? I started this in 2017, I think. But you can go back to video 1 in the series. You can see it at the top of the playlist, and it will have the date of the video on there. So we have to have somewhere information about what squares the pieces are on. Yeah, that information we're going to use to program the pawn moves. We'll also use it to program the capture moves generally for the other pieces. It's going to be useful for when you're checking the king as well. We're going to have to know where the king is. It's also useful for when we have blocking pieces as well. So to establish if a piece is blocked, well, we have to know where the other pieces are. Yeah, so clearly this is an important piece of information, and we're going to use it first to program in these pawn capture moves. As far as I know, the pawn is the only move that captures in a different way to its normal move. So that's something that we're going to have to program in. So what I'm saying is, I always ramble on. What I'm saying is, yeah, we need to store somewhere the position of the pieces. And I'm suggesting that the best place to store this information is in the engine sheet, which we're using as a supporting sheet to store information. This sheet is interacting with the VBA editor. It allows us to quickly make changes. It's a better approach than putting everything in the VBA editor. You can strike a balance between the sheet and the VBA editor. That's the way to do it optimally. So ideally, we'd have a column in here somewhere, which I think is going to be about here. We'd have a column in here, and the column would say current position, and it will give us the current cell that the square is in. I think that's the best way to do it. Okay. Tony says, can we use the cells property of the board range? That could be helpful, Tony. I'm talking about specific pieces. So we've got to think this pawn. So if I move it over here, then we want in our little database on the engine sheet, we want a cell that says, okay, this black pawn is on square E4 on the chessboard, or cell probably the cell actually, cell G7 on the Excel sheet. Can anybody see the problem with this? So if we're going to put an additional column, this is what I'm suggesting we should do. We should put an additional column or some additional columns here. So Control Spacebar, select the column, Control Shift and Plus to put the additional columns in. What problems have we just created with our programming? If I go back to the board now, let's try doing it. If I go back to the board now, I think we're going to get some crazy behavior. Yeah, can you see that? Yeah, so piece is not behaving as we would expect. So my question is, in the chat, why is that? So I've put some extra columns in here. Why is that? And why do we not get the expected behavior from the pieces now? That's a question for the chat. Any ideas? And this is such a common problem in spreadsheet development. Yeah, Kevin has got it in the chat. Well done. So we're going to put additional columns in here. And to be honest, it's an example of not planning an Excel project as well as you could. Okay. But in reality, it happens a lot. Requirements change, I've already said. Complexity is emergent. So you're likely to have to do this on projects. We're going to put some columns in here, but we've got to think, how does this structural change, putting a column in a spreadsheet is a structural change. How does this structural change affect the code? And it does affect the code. We can see it affects the code because the behavior of the pieces is no longer what we would expect. And the problematic line is this line of code here. So this line of code is looking into eMoves table and then looking at a particular column here. But that column has now changed. Those columns have now moved across, okay, because we've added these columns in here. So well done to Kevin. Kevin says the VLOOKUP column references has changed. You're absolutely spot on there, Kevin. So a couple of points here, and probably the main point is that try to plan and design the spreadsheet as best you can to avoid having to make structural changes, to avoid having to put rows and columns in. So try to plan it as best you can. But in reality, you're likely to have to do this at some point. You have to make a structural change and then go back through the programming in order to make it work. So I'm just going to take these Control-Z. I can't do it. Okay, I must have saved the file. I'm just going to delete these columns then. Alt-HDC. Delete these columns. So we're back to normal function now. eMoves table. Yeah, we've got the reference there. Just going to count these columns quickly. Yeah, this seems to be accurate. Okay, so now if we go back to the board, do we get normal function again? Yeah, we've got normal function there. So we're going to put some columns in. So you just say to me, well, Chris, that's easy. You just put a column in, and then we go and make the adjustments in the VBA editor. Yes, that's possible. But at this point, we might need more columns later. We might need more columns later to do stuff. So we could put a few extra columns in now. You know, this might be a good idea. I'm trying to think on my feet, you know, what other stuff might we have to do? And I'm also thinking, could we in future put columns on this side? You know, how many more moves do we have to program in here? I don't think we do have many more moves to program in. So maybe we could go on the other side and avoid this problem altogether. And this is the kind of discussion you're going to be having, you know, with yourself or with your colleagues, with your customer. But this piece of information, you know, the current location of the piece, to me, is a kind of fundamental piece of information, very basic piece of information. So should be over to the left-hand side of the database, because we want to be able to easily access this information. So that would be my argument for putting this piece of information in here. At the same time, I'm going to put some additional columns in here, 4 additional columns in. So now we're looking at eMoves table. We've put 4 columns in. So all of these values in the VBA editor, we're going to have to increase these by 4, which we can do in a couple of minutes, but is something to be avoided. Really is something to be avoided. You know, we could create mistakes when we put this additional information in. You might have a much longer routine to deal with. You might be interacting with other files. You know, it might be very difficult to really understand the full implications of these structural changes and changing the code. So it's something to be avoided, but it may be something you have to do. So can we increase these by a value of 4? And will it help everything work? Okay, let's give it a go. So 5 becomes 9, 6 becomes 10, 7, 11. Is that where you got your lunch, Kevin? 12. Here. And 9 becomes 13. And 9 becomes 13 here. So just made those changes, and we're going to have one more 13 at the bottom here. So we made those changes. Control-S, save the file. So if this is working, then the pawn moves, if you like, the pawn moves should now be in the 13th column. The pawn moves should now be in the 13th column. Yeah, Tony says, very good point. I think I covered it in my little discussion before. Why not add cols after col L? Yep, you could certainly do that. I think we might have more columns along here though. I think we're going to have more columns here to do with the moves to an art. You know, it moves from something where there's a definitive solution, there's a best way to doing things, to something that's more. And then where is the start of the eMoves table? The eMoves table starts here. And then just by selecting the, just by selecting these columns across the top, I can see how far across the table we are. You know, I could count that manually, but I can do it just by selecting all of these columns and just by inputting some values there. I can quickly see that that is column 13 in the table to do with pawn moves, and we can see in the VBA editor we have column 13 in the table there. So that kind of trick or tip, whatever you want to call it, you'll be like, yeah, but I could just count it. Yeah, if it's 13 columns, you could just count them. Although if you're anything like me, you might make a mistake counting to 13. But today I was working with a spreadsheet with 150 columns in, I think. And I was doing exactly this. We were changing the structure of the file. Business circumstances have changed. Some new functions are needed. We were putting some new columns in. So I had to count, what is 53 columns along, okay? And another useful way to do this is to use the equals column formula. So this will be another way to do it. So C equals column here. This will give me the column number, and then we can just drag this across here. Oh, but I also managed to pick up that piece as well. Interesting. Okay, let's move the piece over here. Okay, then I hit Control D here, take it across. Okay, maybe not Control D, just drag it across. There we go. And you can see the column number. So this is another way, another useful way if you've got lots of columns and you need to know a column number, this is another useful way to do it. So what are we expecting to happen? Well, we should be able to go back to the board now, and we should have the usual functionality. So let's try setting up the board. Yes. And then what have we got? Pawn's fine. Knight's fine. That problematic knight is fine. The king is fine there. Okay, so it seems to be working pretty well. So we've managed to make a structural change and done some testing, and we can kind of sign off that structural change now. How about offsetting from the move diag cell? Yes, yeah, this is certainly a possible approach here. So Tony is saying, rather than having values here, or this is how I'm interpreting what you're saying, Tony, and I had a similar idea. Rather than having hard-coded values here, could we have some kind of mechanism to kind of look up this value, or could we use a variable or something instead here? I just had the idea of using a variable and then incrementing the value of the variable up by 1 between each line of each of these lines of codes here, but like each of these lines of code. But so you'd have a variable here. Variable equals variable plus 1, and then you put that variable here instead of the number. But as you can see, that would allow you to set a starting point. Then all of the other values would work from that starting point. So maybe that would make it more scalable, more flexible. That would mean we could add columns, but it also complicates the code because it's going to put another, 5 or 6 lines of code in there. That's not ideal for us. So as always, any approach has pros and cons, and a good programmer will never tell you this is the way to do it. A good programmer will say you've got 2 or 3 options. These are the pros and cons, and this is my recommendation. So good shout there, Tony. So give me a shout in the chat. We've still got Kevin, Carlos, Paul, Tony. Give me a shout out, and let me know what you want to do in these live streams. I think it's a good chance to kind of get some insights into the process. Let me just mention what Carlos said here. Another good idea. Carlos is saying, how about a variable that stores the result of a match of each column header? Yes, that's a technique I use. You would have seen on my channel quite a few times. So Carlos is saying, could we match a value to the column headers? And yes, we could. But my questions there is going to be, what value are we going to use for the match? But if we could do that somehow, yes, I think there's potential there. I'm not quite clear in my head, what value we're going to match to the column there. But, let me know in the chat, Carlos, or in the comments on this video, and we can look at implementing that. So let's say current location. or let's say current square. Let's say current cell to be a bit more precise, because if we say location, you can guarantee in 3 weeks' time, I'll come back to it and I'll think location. So is that the cell on the spreadsheet or is that the square on the chessboard? So good idea to make our lives easier, a bit more precision there. These columns, Alt-H-O-W, I'm just gonna minimize them. Yeah, you could hide those columns, but I just don't like hidden columns. You know, generally in the development process, you know, you tend to just miss them and this can cause problems. So I prefer to be able to see the columns there. So our question is, excuse me, our question is, can we develop a macro quickly? And it might not be within the scope of this live stream, but we might have to continue it next time. Can we quickly write a macro to tell us the location of all of the pieces? Because we're saying we need to know this information before we start processing the moves, if you like, before we start looking at possible moves. We have to understand where the other pieces are, because we're going to have pieces that are blocking, pieces that pawns can capture, etc., etc. So what options do we have now? Resist the temptation here to just open the VBA editor and start coding. You know, that is a possible approach, but it's not the best approach. It's better to look through the existing resources. And is there something that we can use? Is there something that we can adapt? Is there a piece of a routine that we can modulate, take it out of a routine? Now this setup board routine, what have we got here? Setup board. Okay, yeah, we do have some shapes there. I'm more interested in this code. We've got this clear board code here. Okay. Okay. So what do you think? We could put this new code. I mean, I think the routine is going to look something like this, but I can't see anything that we can actually adapt here. So I think we are going to create a new routine, but maybe we'll use some of the concepts and the structure from this clear board routine. Okay, and then where is this code going to go? I'm just going to copy paste here, Control C, back to the moves process. We've got to think, where is this code going to go? Well, it should go, let's have a look. It should go about, yeah, it should go about here. Okay, and let's say routine to give location, current square of pieces. Now we put it at the top of the routine. Put it at the top of the routine there, because we need that information before we do other stuff. So before we start looking at the moves, etc., then we need to work out where the pieces are currently. Yeah, I think the best approach here is going to be to have a separate routine. So down at the bottom here, we've got some separate routines, and then to call that routine. And that's going to mean that we have this modular approach. I've already used the word modular on the stream. You might have heard me use it in the video. So rather than having a single long routine, you know, this routine is already relatively long. So let's try to limit the length as much as possible, put the code in a different routine, and that has the effect of creating this modular quality. So we might be able to use that code in another routine, save some time for us. Let me know in the code. Let me know in the chat. Are you working along with me? Can you build this routine yourself? Okay, let's say sub give piece location. Okay, Control V. Let's go old routine. So I think it was in the setup board, wasn't it? Yeah, Control C, move process. You can see the value of having properly named modules there. The fact these modules were named, that helped me locate this particular routine. So something like this. Now I'm going to say below this routine, routine to give the location of the pieces, give the current square of the pieces. Okay, Kenny says not a chance. So what's that about, Kenny? Was that one of my questions? Let me know. And Kenny, yeah, the question today is, where are you tuning in from and what is the weather like? So let us know. Routine to give the current square of the pieces, and let's say inputs current square to engine sheet. Okay. Okay. Right, back to the VBA editor. Sheets board.shapes, yes. Okay. So I'm happy with the general structure here. Just want an indentation here. Okay, so this is going to loop through the shapes. Let's see if we just step through the code now. F8 key, if, and let's just keep this really simple. Take it down to its simplest form if you like. Okay, I'm going to reset the code now. Control S, save the file. Just wonder if we can get the name of the shapes here. Okay, stop that. Let's just say okay. So this should, yeah, show us the names of the shapes here. Okay. So the reason I've stopped talking is I'm thinking about something in my head, and I'm thinking, what if, yeah. So we want to loop through all of the shapes here, but what if this button is going to count as a shape, yeah? And we want to ignore that because that button is not a piece. So we want to exclude that from the routine. How to do that? Well, we could just have a conditional statement here saying, if the name of the shape is the name of this button, which I think was but set, then don't do whatever we're going to do. We could do that. But I think subsequently, we're going to have more buttons and more shapes on the board sheet subsequently. So we might be storing up problems for later. We might create a situation where we're deleting shapes and buttons that we've put on the board sheet. So that's something for us to think about. How might we do that? I have an idea, and it does involve using match or using countif, I think. I have an idea. Do you have any ideas for dealing with that? Let me know in the chat. And who's in the chat? Yeah, Kenny. Kenny says, tuning in from Missouri, USA. The weather at work on a break for a few minutes, haven't had time to look, probably nice weather. You asked if we could build this program. I'm still trying to figure out how to write the code. So Kenny says, really interesting point this. Thanks, Kenny, for the comment. Kenny says, I can modify code, but I don't know how to create it. Well, you just saw what I did here, Kenny. You just saw how I created, but I didn't create it, how I went about building this routine. I went about building this routine not by writing it from scratch. I went about building this routine by finding something else that does a similar thing and then adapting it. So if you're saying you can modify your code, you can modify code, but you can't write it from scratch, well, that's an excellent starting point. And actually, in reality, a lot of the code you create is modified code anyway. So I'd say that's probably a good thing, you're learning how to modify code. If you want to get into writing your own code, which I would call organic coding, because you're kind of growing it yourself, you could say, organic coding, look at our Excel VBA for Beginners playlist. In the first series there's a series of 4 videos where you do some organic coding with some loops and counting numbers and stuff. So check that one out. But yeah, modification is a very important part of coding. So I want a mechanism here to say, if this shape appears in this list here, if the shape appears in this list here, then we want to write the location of the shape here. Okay, so how are we going to do that? We've got any ideas in the chat? I can think of a few ideas. Trying to think of the best one. All of them have limitations. You know, we've got to a kind of critical level of complexity in the spreadsheet where whatever you do is going to have drawbacks. I was actually thinking, you know, we could just have a named range, use a named range for this column. But then I was thinking, but what if we have promoted pieces? So then we'd have to have additional pieces down here. So I'm going to make an assumption at this point, which is that we're not going to cater for promoted pieces at the time being. You've got to make some assumptions. Got to make some assumptions to get things to a level of simplification where you can actually do some coding. So I think that's perfectly okay to make that assumption as long as we're aware of it. So let's have, okay. What are our naming conventions in the file? Well, this naming convention I like, and it's a naming convention I've integrated into my practice in the past couple of years, which is probably why the initial names, some of the names don't follow this convention. But you can see I've got E_moves table. So this E is the first letter of the sheet that the name is on. So that means just by looking through the names, you can get a sense for where they are in the file. So you can see that this name is on the engine sheets. And this column is also on the engine sheet. So I'm going to select all of these. Let's just hit the whole desktop here. Select this range. And then let's call it E piece names. There we go. So E for engine and then an informative name. An informative name. So if I'm looking at a list of names, I'm able to understand. E piece names. Right. So now we can put a conditional statement in here and say we're going to call a spreadsheet formula from the VBA editor, worksheet function.countif. Now for countif we need the range, and the range we already have. We can use the named range here. I'll just move to a better view here. Let's go on the left of the screen. Then we say sheets engine dot range E moves table. No, it's E piece. I've already forgotten. E piece names. There we go. And then we need the name of the shape. chrisshape.name. And I'll put an underscore in here so we can see what's going on. Okay, need an indentation for this conditional statement, keep it nice and clear. Then let's have an annotation here as well, a comment. So if the name of the shape appears in the piece list, and then as we usually do, if we've got a conditional statement or a loop, let's kind of close the annotation as well. Make things super clear for us, save us some stress later on. That's a good point, that, Tony. Yeah. Tony says promoted pieces replace existing pieces. Yeah. So that's a good point, Tony. Thanks for pointing that out. So that means that we shouldn't have a problem with needing more pieces. So that means we can have a maximum of 32 pieces on the board at any one time. It's just that you can have more than one queen if somebody promotes to a queen, for example. That's a good point though, Tony. Thank you. Makes things a little bit easier, about 0.1% easier, but it's a win for us. It does make things easier. Okay. Okay. Let's try this. There we go. So what's going to happen here then? Well, if the name is in the list, then nothing's going to happen. If the name is not in the list, then we're going to have a message box. It's going to flash up the name of the shape And that's going to allow us to understand, hopefully. Now, what are we expecting to happen? Well, we have this one shape here that's a button. We have one shape here that's called but set. Now, that shape name is not in our piece list here. So we're expecting, not in our piece list here. So we're expecting a message box to flash up with that but set name just flashing up. That will show us the mechanism is working. F5 key, but set is not in the list. Well, it worked first time, guys. Well, finally getting some luck with this task. That did seem to work fine. And there we go. And then let's get the other side of the conditional statement working. And let's just say is in the list. Excuse me. But then let's exit the sub afterwards so that we don't go through all of the shape names. That would be quite onerous. F5 key, but set is not in the list. W-1 is in the list, and then we exit the sub. Good. So just, again, quick testing mechanism. So we created a new mechanism. Let's test it now before it gets too complicated, so we can kind of tick that off. Okay. So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to find how far down the table is the piece that we're looking at. So let's put this to the chat. What mechanism are we going to use to do that? It is something that somebody has mentioned. I think it was Kevin. No, Carlos, you actually mentioned this mechanism in the chat. So any ideas there how to do it? Well, we can use a match formula. Match tells us how far down a range an item is, a value is, how far down a column, how far across a row an item is. That's the concept of match. So can we implement match here? Yes. Kevin said Carlos smartly mentioned match. Well done. Well done to Carlos, and well done to Kevin for giving the credit to Carlos. Excellent stuff. And how are we going to do this? Let's use a variable here. And let's say target row. So again, application.worksheet function. I'll head over to the other side here. And this is going to be match, dot match, of course. So what do we need for match? For match, we need, what are we matching? Which is going to be chrisshape.name. So the name of the shape, of course. I'm going to hit the underscore now. The underscore just continues the code on the next line, and that's only for visual purposes, for presentation purposes, so that you can understand. You don't have to do that. chrisshape.name, and the range is sheets engine. .range e piece names. Piece names. And then I think we want a 0. Yeah, that gives us the exact match, I believe. What's happening here? We need a comma. Okay, looks pretty happy with that. So, got a conditional statement in here. The conditional statement means is going to exclude any additional shapes or buttons that we put on this sheet later. Control S, save the file. F8 key, step through. So I'm expecting to see a value allocated to target row. So we're into the conditional statement now. I'm just hitting the F8 key on the Windows PC. You could also go to debug and then step into, hit the F8 key now. And yet we have a value allocated to target row, and we've got a value of 1 here. Why is it 1? Well, the shape name, let's go to chrisshape. chrisshape.name is w-1, and we can just see in column C there that w-1 is the first item in the file, the first value in the column rather. And then we've got target row equals 2 and w-2. Let's go through a few times. So now we're on W pawn 8, so target row should be 8, of course. Oh, 7. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Why is that? Chrisshade.name W pawn. The value hasn't been allocated to the variable yet, so that will be 8, and Chrisshade.name is W pawn 8 there. So happy with that. Right. So now we've got to think. Now we've got to think, how do we get how do we get the address of the cell? Getting a little bit tired here. How do we get the address of the cell into the database? Now, there's a fantastically powerful line of code. Well, let me know in the comments, of course. Let me know in the chat if you've got any ideas. There's a fantastically powerful line of code, which is a dot top left cell. Dot top left cell, which is a property, of course. Just trying to remember how to put this in. Yes. Well, let's just try to do it very easily. Is it as easy as this? I don't think this is going to work. Let's give it a go. Okay. Fully expecting this to return an error. Yeah, it will if I don't spell message box properly, of course. But I'm just trying to remind myself how this top left cell property works. Okay, nothing there. Do we need dot address on there? Let's see if this works. Okay, F8 key. Okay, there we go. So that actually did work. Right. So what we can do then is take this line of code. This is going to allow us to get that information into the database. Yep. Yep, Kevin, I think you're right. This what I created seems to be working. So let's stick with that for the time being. Okay, then we've got to say, okay, so where are we in the engine? I'm now looking around in the engine. Do we have an anchor point that we can use here, or shall we just reference? Shall we just anchor point away? Use G3 as the anchor here. So again, I'm thinking if we put this table somewhere else, then is that going to be problematic? Moves table piece EPOS format. Okay. Okay. I think we should assume that we're going to leave the table here. So these columns, yeah, we're going to keep this structure, keep this column layout effectively. Let's just offset from G3 then. And let's say, yep. G3. Dot offset. Okay, and then we've got target row. That's going to be our row offset. That comes first, of course. Then we don't want to move any columns across, so a 0 equals. There we go. Okay, so close to doing it without any errors there. There we go. Okay, so we're going to offset from G3 by the value, get rid of that, by the value of target row. Remember, target row is matching the name of the shape in this range. So that's going to tell us how far down the column is the row that we want. And then it's just going to input the address of the cell that the piece is on. So what are we going to do? Shall we test this step by step, stepping into it, or shall we just play the code and just go for glory? What would you like us to do? Paul Taylor says, ye of little faith. Yes, well, you know, coding does feel like a question of faith sometimes. You've certainly got to take some leaps of faith in coding. But yeah, it's always about regular testing, saving the file, backing up the file, and yeah, just managing those stress levels as best you can. You see, I do very small chunks of coding, test it, that helps keep the stress levels down. Kevin says, glory. Paul says, go for it. Tony Hughes says F5. Yes, Tony. Yes, Tony. Tony says F5. Why did Tony say F5? F5 in the VBA editor, the F5 key is, of course, the shortcut to just play the code, as opposed to the F8 key, which is the shortcut to step through the code. Control S, save the file, shooting for glory, F5. Oh, and we can see that our letters have gone in there. Good, good, good. So we've got the cell there. I'm wondering if we actually want, or do we want the cell, or do we want the square on the board? Or do we want something else? What do you think? That's it, Carlos. Yeah. Carlos, I think we should have some t-shirts made up with that on. Control S, F5, and pray. Yes, I love it. Absolutely. So, but there's a serious learning point there. You know, you've got to always save the file, Control S, and play the code. And then, you've got to be thinking, do I want to test a little part of this code? Do I want to test the whole thing? You're kind of leveraging yourself in different ways. If you're testing the whole thing, well, it could be glorious and ours turned out to be, or it could be a massive failure. If you leverage it lower, just test a little bit of code, then that's probably going to help keep the stress level down. Anyway, Carlos, see if you can sort out some t-shirts for us, Control S and F5, and pray. So we've got the current cell there, but how useful is it just having the current cell? Would it be more useful to have the range on the chessboard, or the square on the chessboard, we should say? And how easy is that to do? Board. Okay, I want to make this column the same width as column G. How would you do that? Alt on the Windows PC, Alt HOW and enter, and then F4 to repeat the last action, square on board. There we go. The F4 key repeats the last action, of course. There we go. So the square on the board, how can we... Okay, I do have an idea of how to do this, I think. Interesting. Tony's saying, would this be a good time to properly name the pieces W pawn because becomes W queen's rook pawn? Interesting, Tony. I think the names are good enough for what we need to do. Yeah. I mean, the names do hold some meaningful information. We're using the W and the B at the beginning of the names. We're using that to distinguish between white pieces and black pieces, which we've seen in the moves process up here. Yeah, so here we're using that information to distinguish between the white pieces and the black pieces. Apart from that, I don't see any particular benefits in changing the names at the moment, but let me know. Let me know if you disagree, Tony. And right, yep, so just looking at this. Okay. Crochet at the top of cell.address. Okay. Yeah, right, let's try this. So we're going to put some more information onto the engine sheet into our little database there. E, F, G, H. So H is the next column. What information do we want here? Let's just see if we can put the row here. Okay. See what happens now. F5 key, back into the database. Okay. Yeah, we've got all of the rows here. Okay. Now can we combine that? Okay, let's try this. Ooh, okay, Right, so yeah, I'm saying to the VBA editor, go to the value in B and the row that the piece is in. Yeah. Now, if we look at the board, the value in B is going to be a 7. So this should give us the actual row, or more accurately, the rank, because the ranks are the names of the rows on a chessboard. So Control S, save the file, F5 key. What have we got on the engine sheet? Square on the board, white, color. Okay, so what happened there then? Ah, yeah, so we need to say sheets board here, of course. Okay, Control S, save the file. So Carlos, this is Control S, F5 and pray. Control S, F5, praying. And what have we got here? Yeah, so we've managed to get the ranks here. That's good. Yeah, and then we should be able to use the same technique. Okay, so that's giving us the rank. Now we need the file. Should be the same thing, should be simple. Always seems simple, doesn't it? Okay, underscore here. And we want the and sign. There we go. So this should just give us the row twice, F5 key. Yeah, I can see the row twice there. Okay, so the first one, we want this to be, yeah, so this is going to be, how are we going to do this? Right, we're going to have to do this using cells, I think. Yeah, okay. Let's try this. Oh dear. Yeah, Chris, so this has to be the column. F5 key, playing the code again. So that's going to be the column, then the, yeah. Yes, and then the row, what's the row? So the row is 11. Right, how about this? How about this? Okay, right, what are we saying now? F5 key, into the engine sheet, yeah. Managed to get the squares of the board in there, have we? A2, B2, C2, yeah, that looks accurate. H1, okay. Yeah, it seems to have worked there. So sorry for the lack of commentary there, but obviously you can follow along yourself and see how this all works. But yeah, I've used a combination of techniques here. We've got the offset method, and then we're using this top left cell property. I've just extracted the row, just the column, just extracted the row here, and used a combination of techniques to get what we need here, which is the square on the board. Just going down these. So for example, so what have we got? The bottom piece is the black rook, yeah, is on H8, knight on G8, pawn on H7, yeah. So seems to be accurate enough. Okay, so yeah, as I said, apologies for not talking through that in more detail, but of course you can download the file, work through yourself. And I think in this series, you know, I've spent a lot of time talking through things in great deal, talking about the best approach, different principles. So maybe now and again, people just want me to do some coding rather than just talking all the time. So anyway, you can work through it, download the download file, see how it's all working. DJ Samo, hi and welcome. We're just finishing off here, but you might have time in the chat to tell us where you're tuning in from and what the weather is like. So yeah, that's as far as we'll go, but we've managed to get this important piece of information. So where is this piece on the board? That's going to allow us, if you think back to what we were trying to do originally, that's going to allow us to identify if we have this situation here, where we have pawns arranged in this formation. That means that the pawn has an additional move. The pawn has this additional capture move. So by listing the pieces in the engine, we've got them listed there. It should allow us to identify this additional capture move. So that's as far as it goes. Just looking through the chats, can't see any more questions. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. Thank you, Michelle, Tony, Paul, Mo, Kevin, Carlos, who else? Kenny, Tony, and Dijo just at the end there. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week for more from the Skunkworks. Take care, guys.